Doki Doki Literature Club is a great visual novel. That's not to say that it's in any way a masterpiece, or even to imply that I would consider myself a fan of it. However, its acute understanding of the strengths and capabilities of its medium, and the way it utilizes those strengths to create a truly unique psychological experience, have made it one of the most conceptually outstanding and unsettling pieces of media I've consumed in the last year. So, let's talk about it. Doki Doki Literature Club thrives on the strength of its unique concepts, such as the famous Monica loop, which involves a shockingly blatant fourth wall break, and participation on the part of the player acting outside of the game's mechanics to reach the story's conclusion, while also providing more thematic material than any other segment in the game, the eternal one-sided conversation with Monica frequently taking on a philosophical nature. This is an interesting concept within the context of the medium in of itself because of how it takes advantage of the relationship between the player and the game for a strictly narrative purpose in a manner that's unprecedented and worthy of its own separate discussion. But as memorable as it is, I don't think it's entirely to thank for the game's explosive success. Many players have described Doki Doki Literature Club as a genuinely disturbing psychological horror story, and while the Monica loop and everything it entails is surprising, it's not so much horrifying as it is blunt and unsettling. There's something else that the game is doing here that, while more subtle, turns the game's central conflicts and concepts into a final product that is far more disturbing than the sum of its parts. Before we begin discussing this in too much depth, we need to back up a bit and take a look at what Doki Doki Literature Club appears to be from the perspective of the prospective player unaware of its true intentions. A self-insert romance visual novel. The conceptual appeal of self-insert media in general is obviously based in wish fulfillment. In the case of Doki Doki, that wish is the desire to participate and become emotionally invested in a romance story in which you are the protagonist surrounded by cute anime girls who adore you. You don't have to look very far into Doki Doki Literature Club to realize what kind of game it is. When you open up the Steam page, you are met with a slideshow of cute anime girls looking at you and saying cute phrases that you'd only ever find in an anime dating simulator. The summary reads, "The Literature Club is full of cute girls. Will you write the way into their heart?" Finally, the very first thing you do upon starting the game is to enter your name. Everyone who begins playing the visual novel without having been spoiled will be well aware of what they're entering into and willing to suspend their disbelief enough to become immersed in its narrative in favor of a good time with some cute literature nerds. You grow accustomed to having the characters say your name in almost every exchange of dialogue until, despite the fact that your immersion can never be complete due to the mechanics and style of the game, you're willing to convince yourself that you're a part of its world. Because you understand that this is a self-insert game, the fact that the characters are basically walking stereotypes isn't a deal breaker since, again, hanging out with cute anime girls is the entire point. Additionally, early on the characters are so visually appealing and generally good-natured that you easily come to enjoy their company. And after 2 to 3 hours of playing, the content warning at the beginning of the game has already slipped into the back of your mind. It's because you've made these concessions that when the game inevitably betrays the player that it comes as such a shock. Sayuri's admission of her struggles with depression followed by her suicide is a massive game changer in every conceivable way. Everything you had expected of and from the game thus far is ripped out from under you as it becomes clear that the intentions of the novel's creators were never as they appeared. Within the context of the game's narrative, this is when things go downhill and the dominoes leading to the Monica loop begin to fall. According to various forums, this event literally breaks the game, setting the end of the story in stone. It's also when the player's relationship with the game changes dramatically. After Sayuri commits suicide and you discover that your save banks are completely useless, you return to the main menu to find Sayuri's image and other features of the screen heavily distorted. When you resume play, the story resets to where it began and everything is essentially the same as it had been initially, but Sayuri is no longer a part of its world. In other words, you are forced to relive many of the moments from the previous game, but with the knowledge that a far darker narrative lies just beneath the surface. What this plot point essentially does is create a brand new imaginary character, an alternate version of yourself. And while this character doesn't actually exist in the game, they couldn't be less real in your perception of it. There is you, the player, fully aware of the game's dark and twisted nature, and you, the self-insert character, still thinking you're about to join the literature club and have the time of your life. You share the same name, and the characters continue to use it to refer to you to an extent that quickly becomes unnerving. Both you and the alternate version of yourself are invested in the characters and immersed in the game's narrative. But despite these connections, there are too many differences for the self-insert character to be an accurate representation of you, the player. The you in the game is oblivious to Sayuri's suicide and to the fact that Sayuri ever existed at all, unaware that the game's world has begun to distort and become increasingly incomprehensible. You, the player, know from hints of dialogue during the first game that Monica likely lies at the center of the confusion, but the you in the game has no reason to suspect her. An additional layer of fear and suspense begins to grip you as you begin to realize that your decisions never had any substantial effect on the game's central narrative. Free will was always an illusion, but the you in the game still writes poems and converses with the girls as if you had any narrative agency. The you in the game is unaware of your existence in a horror story, while you, the player, are forced to watch in suspense as this alternate version of yourself writes their way into violent situations. You are you, but you're also in the game. The you in the game is also you. The characters still refer to you by your name, and the scenario generally plays out just like the first, apart from its far darker conclusion. However, the you in the game is just a character now, forced into whatever twisted situations the creators put you in, and there's nothing you can do about it. But that character is still an extension of yourself, and watching them as they encounter those situations freaks you out as if it were actually happening to you, the player. It's like sitting in a theater watching a grotesque horror movie play out in which you are the lead character. And that's not only disturbing as all hell, it's actually really clever. This dissociation ends in the Monica loop when she explicitly reminds you that there's only one version of you in existence, the one sitting in front of the computer playing the game, and that the self-insert character is a version of you that only existed because you chose to participate in the tropes of the game's genre. After she points it out, it seems so obvious that you become aware of just how much the game had played with your perception of its mechanics. Just in case that wasn't enough, to break free of this loop, you have to go into the game's folder and delete Monica's character file, which pretty much breaks your immersion once and for all. While the game manages to continue to be suspenseful as you wonder what could possibly happen after you delete the file, you no longer associate yourself with the character diving headfirst into their inevitable doom, so it ceases to be scary. But as long as that dissociation is suspended, it keeps you on the edge of your seat. Getting back to where we started, this psychological gimmick only works because the game disguises itself and functions as a self-insert visual novel. Just for fun, let's consider how this concept would play out in an anime, film, or television adaptation if the Monica loop were a non-issue. Such an adaptation would prompt the creation of a protagonist to play the role of the self-insert character. However, this character would also require a name and some degree of narrative agency, and ideally a personality, seeing as how the player's identity and perceived agency are what makes the dissociation possible in the game. It's difficult to imagine such an adaptation succeeding in being genuinely unsettling and suspenseful. Of course, I guess you could always just pull a one room and bypass the protagonist altogether, but I mean, would you really be able to take it seriously at that point? Without such a strong gimmick, an adaptation would end up having to rely heavily on shock value. Not to say that Doki Doki Literature Club doesn't implement shock value, quite the contrary, but the influx of mediocre horror anime and cute girls killing each other shows should have taught us by now that jump scares and gratuitous amounts of blood and gore fail to leave lasting impressions on most audiences. This is a story that can only work as a visual novel, and that's what makes it great within the context of its medium. In conclusion, I think this very specific utilization of the appeal of self-insert romance visual novels is what has made Doki Doki Literature Club such a massive success. Paired with other compelling and thought-provoking segments such as the Monica loop, it currently stands as a fascinating conceptual work and a great example of what can be done with a strong idea in the hands of creators who understand what they have to work with. It takes a lot of risks, but still succeeds at being genuinely disturbing. To say that this kind of experimentation is rare to see would be a tragic understatement. And for that, I'm happy to praise it for being one of the most unique and harrowing experiences I've had with media in ages. Thanks for watching, guys. Shout out to my buddy James for this new microphone and enhanced audio quality on all of my videos moving forward. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it in the future, then hey, you know what to do. Hit the like button, share it with your friends, and stick around. I got more where that came from. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.